Hi everyone, it's Yapi again. I'm going to continue with Galatians chapter 2. Before we continue, please go to video 1, chapter 1. Just go through the introduction there because it gives you an explanation of why Paul wrote this letter and who the false teachers are that Paul refers to in this letter. Just give you an overview of what's happening before you continue with the other chapters. But if you don't feel like listening to me reading it, you can read it yourself. Just pause the video and read it, and then forward the video and keep reading. So I'm going to continue reading Galatians 2, verse 1. Then after 14 years, I went up again to Jerusalem with Barnabas and also took Titus with me. Explanation. Paul wanted to inform the disciples of the message he preached amongst the Gentiles, not because he thought the disciples were the ultimate authority and that he needed their approval, but because other believers looked up to the disciples as leaders and the bearers of the original truth Messiah taught them. Messiah didn't teach them a new teaching removed from Scripture, for we read in John 17, verse 6, that the disciples kept the law of Yahuwah and that they called Yahuwah on his name. For Messiah told them what the Father's name is, and that we are saved by calling on Yahuwah's name. See Acts 2, verse 21. And Psalm 22, verse 22, I will declare your name to my brethren. In the midst of the assembly, I will praise you. Here it refers to the Messiah that will proclaim Yahuwah's name to his followers. We are to follow in Messiah's footsteps. John 15, verse 10, 1 John 2, verse 6, and 1 Corinthians 11, verse 1. So we are supposed to tell people the Father's name like Messiah did. His disciples taught the name, Acts 2 verse 21, Acts 4 verse 12, and so did Paul, Romans 10 verse 13, Hebrews 1 verse 4. These followers of Messiah didn't suck teachings out of their thumbs. They taught the law and prophets and based their views on the law and prophets. They quoted the law and prophets when ministering to the people. Today, Christians reject the law and don't refer to the law and prophets when teaching salvation. Galatians 2 verse 2. Before I continue, I just want to mention here, yes, today's teachings are far removed from the original teachings. The original teachings were taught from the law and prophets. They didn't have a New Testament or letters from different people that they can use in their ministries. They taught from the law of Yahuwah and the prophets. That's what they did. And of course, I also mentioned what Yahushua himself taught on the law and prophets. So that's what, if you can't go to the law and prophets and show your beliefs, why you believe what you believe, then you have a false belief. You must be able to show from the law and prophets that what you believe is correct, like the Bereans did. Galatians 2 verse 2. And I went up by revelation and communicated to them that gospel which I preach among the Gentiles, but privately to those who were of reputation, lest by any means I might run or had run in vain. Explanation. We see here that Paul wanted a unity within the assemblies of Yahushua. Yahuwah revealed to him that he needed to present his teachings to the disciples and get their approval. Paul didn't want a faction between Jews and Gentiles believers. That is why he humbled himself and went to the disciples for approval. Galatians 2 verse 3. Yet not even Titus, who was with me, being a Greek, was compelled to be circumcised. Explanation. Seems like circumcision was an important thing for the Essenes during those days. They saw it as being part of salvation. Acts 15 verse 1. They would compel new believers to get them circumcised physically, otherwise they are not saved. Acts 15 verse 1 and 2. And certain men came down from Judea and taught the brethren, unless you are circumcised according to the custom of Moses, you cannot be saved. Therefore, when Paul and Barnabas had no small dissension and dispute with them, they determined that Paul and Barnabas and certain others of them should go up to Jerusalem to the apostles and elders about this question. Believers in those days did circumcise themselves, but they didn't do it to be saved. They did it as part of the process of becoming perfect and being obedient to Yahuwah's law. They were first circumcised in the heart, and later circumcised in the flesh, like Timothy being circumcised by Paul, and Titus too. Paul is definitely not against circumcision, for the circumcised for he circumcised Timothy and said in Romans 3 verse 1 and 2, what advantage then has the Jew, or what is the profit of circumcision? Much in every way, chiefly because to them were committed the oracles of Elohim. So circumcision is good, it isn't bad. In Galatians, Paul refers to circumcision being done for the wrong reason as bad. Galatians 2 verse 4. And this occurred because of false brethren secretly brought in, who came in by stealth to spy out our liberty which we have in Messiah Yahushua, that they might bring us into bondage. Explanation. This is mentioned in Acts 15, and in Acts 15 the disciples concluded that circumcision is not part of salvation. They wanted the Gentiles to focus first on eradicating certain sins out of their lives, and then go to the synagogues to hear the law of Moses, so that they can obey the rest of the law as they hear it. Acts 15 verse 20 and 21. But that we write to them to abstain from things polluted by idols, from sexual immorality, from things strangled, from blood. For Moses has had throughout many generations those who preach him, the law, in every city, being read in the synagogues every Sabbath. Another liberty Paul might refer to is not having to sacrifice animals for sins anymore. As believers in Yahuwah, they accepted Yahushua's death as the perfect sacrifice for all their sins. Paul will touch on this again in chapter 3. Just concerning this scripture, for Moses had throughout generations been preached in the synagogues, so we see that the new believers had to go learn the law anyway. Okay, let's continue with this. I just had somebody at the front door that I needed to attend to. So now I can continue again. Let's just move this somewhere else. Galatians 2 verse 4. And this occurred because of false brethren secretly brought in. I think we've done this one, yes. And I explained about Acts 15 verse 20 and 21, where the Gentiles needs to hear the law and learn it in the synagogue so that they can also keep the law, and part of this law is circumcision, physically circumcision. So the physical circumcision, the issue was that it's not part of salvation. You don't get physically circumcised to be saved. That was the issue. Not that circumcision is bad or that you're not allowed to do it. It is in the law. So if they went to the synagogues and they learn about the circumcision, they'll eventually physically circumcise as they are or as they feel led, like Timothy and Titus. Galatians 2 verse 5. To whom we did not yield submission even for an hour, that the truth of the gospel might continue with you. Explanation. The true message is that by faith in Yahuwah, we are forgiven of our lawlessness, and then we obey the law so that we can receive the law on our hearts as Yahuwah's Spirit writes it. 1 John 3 verse 24, John 14 verse 15 and 16. Circumcision is part of the law, and so is heart circumcision. The spiritual change comes first with the new covenant, and then the physical change. The new covenant was given in Deuteronomy 29 and 31. It is not a New Testament thing implemented by Yahushua. It is not a New Testament thing implemented by Yahushua. It is in the law Yahuwah and Yahushua's blood was for the implementation of the new covenant. Matthew 26, verse 28. For this is my blood of the new covenant, which is shed for many for the remission of sins. Lawlessness. Yahushua's sacrifice was made for the new covenant implementation. Through faith in Yahuwah, people could be in a new covenant relationship with Yahuwah, having their sins forgiven because of Yahushua's sacrifice, receiving the laws on their hearts. It is not a must obey the law, but rather a want to obey the law. You obey the law because you are set free from your previous lawlessness. Romans 3, verse 25. Galatians 2, verse 6. But from those who seem to be something, whatever they were, it makes no difference to me. Yahuwah shows personal favoritism to no man. For those who seem to be something added nothing to me. Explanation. Paul says here that he wasn't afraid of anyone because of their man-given ranks or titles. He wasn't intimidated by anyone since he knows that there is no favoritism with Yahuwah. It is men who gives titles, not Yahuwah. So the titles means nothing. That is why Messiah said in Matthew 23, verse 8 to 9, But you, do not be called Rabbi, for one is your teacher, the Messiah, and you are all brethren. Do not call anyone on earth your father, for one is your Father, he who is in heaven. Galatians 2, verse 7. But on the contrary, when they saw that the gospel for the uncircumcised has been being committed to me, as the gospel for the circumcised was to Peter, probably referring to the meeting he had with the disciples in Acts 15. Galatians 2 verse 8. For he who worked effectively in Peter for the apostleship to the circumcised also worked effectively in me toward the Gentiles. Explanation. Paul mentions this meeting because he wants to show the Galatians that the disciples didn't think that circumcision is part of salvation. Galatians 2 verse 9. And when James, Cephas, and John, who seemed to be pillars, perceived the grace that had been given to me, they gave me and Barnabas the right hand of fellowship, that we should go to the Gentiles, and they to the circumcised. Explanation. So what happened in the meeting with the disciples? Acts 15 verse 1. And certain men, mainly Essenes, which came down from Judea, taught the brethren, and said, Except ye be circumcised after the manner of Moses, you cannot be saved. Acts 15 verse 5 to 11. But there rose up certain of the sect of the Pharisees, which believed, saying, that it was needful to circumcise them and to command them to keep the law of Moses. We see in verse 1 that the issue here, the false gospel, is doing certain things to attain salvation. In this case, being circumcised and obey the law of Moses to be saved. The Pharisees, Essenes, saw their oral laws as part of Moses' laws and even obeyed it more than Yahweh's laws. See Matthew 15 and Mark 7. Later on, we hear the disciples refer to the oral laws of the Essenes and Pharisees too. These laws should not be kept by the Gentiles. Yahuwah's laws should be kept because we are saved from our lawlessness, old nature, our lawless old nature. So yes, law obedience does make out part of the salvation process. Hebrews 10 verse 25 to 29 makes it clear that after accepting Yahushua's sacrifice, if you don't stop living lawless, you aren't saved. Your action shows what you believe. If you believe a chair can hold your weight, you prove you believe to everyone by sitting on the chair. If you believe Yahushua died for your lawlessness, you prove to everyone you believe this by obeying the law now. Philippians 2 verse 12. Therefore, my beloved, as you have always obeyed, not as in my presence only, but now much more in my absence, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. Matthew 24 verse 13. But he who endures to the end shall be saved. This sect of the Pharisees probably refers to the Essenes. And the apostles and elders came together to consider of this matter. And when there has been much disputing, Peter rose up and said unto them, Men and brethren, you know how that a good while ago Yahuwah made choice among us, that the Gentiles by my mouth should hear the word of the gospel and believe. And Elohim, which know the heart, bear them witness, giving them the set apart spirit, even as he did unto us, and put no difference between us and them, purifying their hearts by faith. Now therefore, why tempt you Elohim, to put a yoke upon the neck of the disciples, which neither our fathers nor we were able to bear? This yoke is not the law of Yahuwah. Nowhere does the believers call Yahuwah's law a yoke or burden. Deuteronomy 30 verse 11 says that the law is not difficult to keep. This yoke was the customs, oral laws added to the law of Yahweh that made the law more difficult to keep. Matthew 23 verse 28. Even so, you also outwardly appear righteous to men, but inside you are full of hypocrisy and lawlessness. Matthew 15 verse 8 to 9. These people draw near to me with their mouth and honor me with their lips, but their hearts is far from me, and in vain they worship me, teaching as doctrines the commands of men. Also see Isaiah 29 verse 13. Yeshua's issue with the Pharisees were that they did not obey the law of Yahweh. Also read Mark 7. The Pharisees added many laws to Yahweh's straightforward commands, making it difficult to obey. Yahweh and they making it difficult to obey Yahuwah, and they even sometimes replace Yahuwah's laws with their own laws. This is the yoke the disciples refers to in Acts 15, Acts 15 verse 11. But we believe that through the grace of the Master Yahushua Messiah we shall be saved even as they. Remember that the grace in the Bible means the ability we receive to obey the law. See Titus 2 verse 11 and 12. Deuteronomy 6 verse 25, Isaiah 51 verse 7, and Acts 15 verse 19 to 24. Let's read Acts 15 verse 19 to 24. Wherefore my sentence is that we trouble not them with which from among the Gentiles are turned to Elohim, but that we write unto them that they abstain from pollution and idols, and from fornication, and from things strangled, and from blood. These commands were to be focused on first, since these four things were practiced by the Gentiles in their temples and was part of their beliefs. But these things weren't the only things they needed to do. See next verse. For Moses of old time have in every city them that preach him, preach the law, being read in the synagogues every Sabbath day. The law of Yahweh can be learned by the Gentiles by going to the synagogues every Sabbath, Saturday. The Gentiles needed to first do the four things mentioned in verse 20, and then learn and obey the law they hear in the synagogues on Sabbath days. Acts 15 verse 24. Forasmuch as we have heard that certain which went out from us have troubled you with words, subverting your souls, saying, You must be circumcised and keep the law, to whom we gave no such command. Acts 15 verse 24 in ANT. We have heard that some men from us went out and confused you with words and have agitated your souls, saying that you should be circumcised and guard the religious customs, something that we did not command them. ANT, is the Aramaic English New Testament, says this verse in context, talking about religious customs of the Pharisees' Essenes. Another proof that this law doesn't refer to Yahweh's law in verse 21. It states that the Gentiles must go and hear and apply the law of Yahweh in their lives. And that's why, people, this is also good to have other translations like this Aramaic to English New Testament. See if you can buy it. It's very good. And it says this in context, that he is talking about the religious customs in context, not Yahuwah's laws in that specific verse, verse 24. Okay, let's continue. Galatians 2 verse 10. They desired only that we should remember the poor, the very thing which I also was eager to do. Explanation. Proverbs 14 verse 31. He who oppresses the poor reproaches his maker, but he who honors him has mercy on the needy. Proverbs 17 verse 5. He who mocks the poor reproaches his maker. He who is glad at calamity will not go unpunished. Proverbs 19 verse 17. He who has pity on the poor lends to Yahuwah, and he will pay back what he has given. Galatians 2 verse 11. Now when Peter had come to Antioch, I withstood him to his face, because he was to be blamed. Explanation. The reason for the next few verses are that the Essenes separated themselves from the new believers who doesn't want to do what they tell them to do, like circumcision and animal sacrifices for sin. This was wrong, and sadly even the true believers fell in this trap, like Peter and a few other Jews, separating themselves from the Gentiles believers when other Judeans came. Galatians 2 verse 12. For before certain men came from James, he would eat with the Gentiles, but when they came, he withdrew and separated himself, fearing those who were of the circumcision. Explanation. Peter feared rebuke from his fellow Judeans if he ate with the uncircumcised. Even though they were circumcised in their hearts, they were already Peter's spiritual brothers and sisters in Messiah. Galatians 2 verse 13. And the rest of the Jews also played the hypocrite with him, so that even Barnabas was carried away with their hypocrisy. Explanation. Hypocrite definition. A person who pretends to have virtues, moral or religious beliefs, principles, etc., that he or she does not actually possess, especially a person whose actions belie stated beliefs. The Judeans showed partiality, which is a sin. James 2 verse 19. But if you show partiality, you commit sin, and are convicted by the law as transgressors. Galatians 2 verse 14. But when I saw that they were not straightforward about the truth of the gospel, I said to Peter before them all, if you, being a Jew, live in the manner of a Gentile, and not as a Jew, why do you compel Gentiles to live as Jews? Explanation. Straightforward about the truth of the gospel. The truth of the gospel is that we are all one in Messiah, and that there are neither Jew nor Greek, nor male nor female. Colossians 3 verse 11. Where there is neither Greek nor Jew, circumcised nor uncircumcised, barbarian, Scythians, slave nor free, but Messiah is all and in all. If you, being a Jew, lived in the manner of Gentiles and not as a Jews, why do you compel Gentiles to live as Jews? Explanation. When Paul tells Peter he lives like Gentiles and not as Jews, he means that Peter sinned like a Gentile and don't obey the law as a Jew. See verse 15, when he shows partiality. Then Paul says, how can Peter compel Gentiles to obey the law like Judeans when he himself breaks the law by showing partiality? Galatians 2 verse 15. We who are Jews by nature and not sinners of the Gentiles. Explanation. Here is the key to understanding verse 14. When Paul refers to Gentiles, he refers to sinners, and to Judeans, he refers to those who obey the law. So again, if you go read the previous verse, it will help you understand it better. Having verse 15. But when I saw that they were not straightforward about the truth of the gospel, I said to Peter before them all, if you, being a Jew, obeying the law, live in this manner of a Gentile, sinning, and not as a Jew, obeying the law, why do you compel the sinning Gentiles to live as law-obedient Jews? That is what Paul was trying to say in verse 14. Galatians 2 verse 16. Knowing that a man is not justified by the works of the law, but by faith in Yahushua Messiah, even we have believed in Messiah Yahushua, that we might be justified by faith in Messiah, and not by the works of the law. For by the works of the law no flesh shall be justified. Explanation. If we do not distinguish between the works of the law and the law of Yahuwah written in our hearts, we will not be able to understand Galatians. The only other place this works of the law appears are in the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Sectarian Manifesto 4QMMT 4Q394 to 399, which talks about the Essenes' beliefs that obeying 24 purity laws will make them righteous. See Introduction. This works of the law can also refer to the Pharisees' oral laws. It does not refer to Yahuwah's laws though. Galatians 2 verse 17. But if while we seek to be justified by Messiah, we ourselves also are found sinners, is Messiah therefore a minister of sin? Certainly not. Explanation. Sin is defined as breaking the law of Yahuwah. See 1 John 3 verse 4. Paul says, by faith in Messiah do we obey Yahuwah's law. If we keep on living lawless, we make Yahushua out to be a minister of sin, which is someone who promotes living lawless as being fine, what Christian preachers are preaching today. Galatians 2 verse 18. For if I build again those things which I destroyed, I make myself a transgressor. Explanation. Build which things? We destroy our old man who desires to live lawless. So if we die to the old man, we cannot keep living lawless, for that will prove that we never died to the old lawless nature in us. See 2 Corinthians 5 verse 17, Romans 8 verse 1 to 14. Romans 8 verse 13. For if you live according to the flesh, you will die. But if by the Spirit you put to death the lawless deeds of the flesh, of the body, you will live. If we build what we destroyed, we are doing the lawless things again, which we repented from or of. The AENT says it well. I have passed by the commandment. To transgress means to pass by the commandments of Yahuwah. It is clear that verse 16 does not talk about Yahuwah's commands, but about men's commands, since Paul tells us to obey Yahuwah's commands in verse 17 and 18. Galatians 2 verse 19. For I, though I through the law died to the law, that I might live to Elohim. Let me read it again. For I through the law died to the law, that I might live to Elohim. Explanation. We read in Romans 8 verse 2, for the law of the Spirit of life in Messiah Yahushua has made me free from the law of sin and death. Ultimately, this is what it boils down to. The law of the Spirit of life versus the law of sin and death. The law of sin and death refers to those who walk according to the flesh, carnal mind, the end of which is hell, for in the flesh we cannot keep the law perfectly for salvation. See Romans 8. Galatians 2 verse 19 explained, for I, through the law of the Spirit of life, died to the law of sin and death, that I might live to Elohim. Remember that we worship Yahweh in spirit and truth, truth meaning the law. Psalm 119 verse 142 and 151. And we can only obey the law with the Spirit's help. Galatians 2 verse 20. I have been crucified, impaled. Messiah died on a pole, not a cross. So let me start again. I have been crucified with Messiah. It is no longer I who live, but Messiah lives in me. And the life which I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of Elohim, who loved me and gave himself for me. let's continue. I'm going to continue with Galatians 2 verse 20. I'm just going to have to read this verse again. I don't think I went to the explanation. I've been crucified with Messiah. It is no longer I who live, but Messiah lives in me. The life which I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of Elohim, who loved me and gave himself for me. Explanation. The fleshly desires and carnal mind nature died with Messiah on the stake. Through Yahuwah's Spirit, Messiah lives in us, and by the Spirit's leading do we now obey Yahuwah's law. Galatians 2 verse 21. I do not set aside the grace of Elohim, for if righteousness comes through the law, then Messiah died in vain. Explanation. Remember, Yahuwah's grace means the ability we receive from Him to be able to obey the law. Titus 2 verse 11 and 12. So Paul is saying that he does not set aside Yahuwah's ability given to us to obey the law. Paul is contrasting the spirit with the flesh. When in the flesh, men desire to be saved by what they do without Yahuwah's help, and not by Yahuwah's grace, His ability. Men depending on themselves for salvation are filled with pride, so it is difficult for them to submit under Yahuwah and ask for forgiveness and admit they were wrong. Creating your own laws to live by, like the Essenes and Pharisees, it is a result of depending on self, flesh, carnal mind for salvation. Just about nobody today believes that they can save themselves, but in those days there were many who believed so. So that is chapter 2 for you. Enjoy your day, and I'll continue with chapter 3 next time. Bye.